I never thought I'd find redemption in the desert. But then again, I never thought I'd lose everything in the first place. 3 minutes. That's all it takes for someone to bleed out from a severed femoral artery. 3 minutes between life and death. 3 minutes to decide who you really are. My name is Michael Brooks, and 5 years ago, I was one of Chicago's most promising trauma surgeons. Today, I'm a paramedic in a small Arizona town that most people couldn't find on a map. Copper Valley, population 8,427, where the air is dry enough to crack your skin and the stars are bright enough to make you believe in second chances. People around here know me as the quiet guy with steady hands. They respect my medical opinion, though they assume I got my knowledge from some military field hospital or inner-city ambulance service. They invite me to their barbecues and wave when I pass by in the grocery store. They don't ask too many questions about my past, which suits me fine. They don't know about the prescription pads, the stolen medications, or the night I nearly killed a patient because I was high on Vicodin. They don't know that I'm one mistake away from losing everything. Again, I ended up in Copper Valley the way most people end up in places they never planned to be, through a series of wrong turns that somehow become a path. After losing my medical license, I spiraled further, burning through what remained of my savings and my relationships. My wife left, taking our daughter with her to Minneapolis. My colleagues stopped returning my calls. The medical community closed ranks, as it always does when one of its own falls from grace. It took me a year to hit rock bottom, sleeping in my car outside Chicago in December, contemplating whether to spend my last $20 on food or pills. That night, I called the only person who might still answer, my old mentor, Dr. Richard Fairbank. He didn't ask questions, just sent me a bus ticket to Arizona and the address of a rehabilitation center in Phoenix. 6 months of rehab, 2 years of meetings, countless apologies to people who wouldn't forgive me, a slow crawl back to some version of a life. When I was finally stable enough to work again, Richard connected me with a former colleague who ran an EMT training program. With my medical background, I breezed through the certification. Being a paramedic wasn't performing surgery, but it was something. It was medicine. It was helping people. It was a pulse when I thought my professional life was dead. I've been in Copper Valley for 2 years now. I rent a small adobe house on the edge of town with a porch that faces the mountains. Every morning, I watch the sunrise paint them gold and pink, and I count another day sober. 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days, to be exact. But sobriety doesn't erase the past. It doesn't restore what's been lost. It just gives you the clarity to see exactly what you've thrown away. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Car versus guardrail on Highway 16. 2 teenage occupants, 1 unresponsive. My partner Dave was driving, his knuckles white against the steering wheel as we raced through the night, sirens wailing into the empty desert darkness. Dave's a good guy, ex-military, no nonsense, doesn't pry. We've been partners for 2 years, and he's never once asked about the shadows that sometimes cross my face when we lose a patient, or why I keep a 5-year-old photo of a dark-haired little girl in my wallet. Multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Second ambulance is 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. Too long. I checked our supplies as Dave navigated the winding highway. The desert at night is a different world. Vast, silent, indifferent to human suffering. It reminds me of the operating room in a way. A space where life and death negotiate terms, where seconds matter, where mistakes leave permanent marks. The wreckage appeared in our headlights like a twisted metal sculpture. A red Jeep Cherokee, its front end wrapped around a guardrail, steam still rising from the crumpled hood. The impact had driven the engine block back into the passenger compartment. Not good. The driver, a teenage girl, was sitting on the ground about 10 feet from the vehicle, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, screaming a name over and over again. Tyler. Tyler. Dave went at her immediately while I moved to the passenger's side. The boy, Tyler, was still strapped into his seat, head lolled forward, unresponsive. The dashboard had collapsed into his legs, and even in the dim light, I could see the unnatural angle of his right thigh. Compound fracture? Almost certainly. I forced the door open, and the metallic smell of blood hit me instantly. Too much blood. A jagged piece of metal had pierced his thigh, and bright arterial blood was pumping steadily onto the floor of the vehicle. Femoral artery. He had minutes, not the 20 it would take for backup to arrive. Dave, I called out. I need the trauma kit and backboard, now. As Dave rushed over with the equipment, I assessed Tyler quickly. 16, maybe 17 years old. Athletic build, probably a high school athlete. Pulse weak and rapid. Skin pale and clammy. Classic signs of hypovolemic shock. The makeshift tourniquet I applied wasn't stopping the bleeding completely. How's it looking? Dave asked, handing me the kit. Bad, I replied, not taking my eyes off the wound. Arterial bleed. We need to get him out and stabilized for transport immediately. But as I said the words, I knew the truth. We wouldn't have time to extract him, stabilize him, and get him to the hospital. Not with that kind of bleeding. By protocol, I should apply pressure, administer fluids, and wait for the extraction team. By protocol, I should watch this kid die. In that moment, everything narrowed to a single choice. Follow protocol, apply pressure, and watch this kid bleed out while waiting for backup. Or use the skills I'd spent 15 years perfecting, skills I was legally no longer permitted to use. I looked at the boy's face. Someone's son. Someone's brother. Someone's whole world. Dave, I said quietly, I need you to get the girl stabilized and call in our status. I've got him. You sure? Dave asked, but he already knew what I was planning. He'd been my partner for 2 years, long enough to suspect there was more to my past than I'd revealed. I'd seen him watching me during complicated cases, noticing how I sometimes knew things a paramedic shouldn't know. Once Dave stepped away, I took a deep breath and reached into our kit for instruments no paramedic should be using in the field. Hemostats. Surgical scissors. Suture material. My hands didn't shake. They never did, even during the worst of my addiction. That was the cruel irony. I could perform flawlessly while falling apart inside. My fingers remembered what to do, muscle memory taking over as I exposed the damaged vessel. Hang in there, kid, I whispered as I made the incision to access the damaged vessel. This isn't how your story ends. The desert night was silent except for the girl's sobs, now muffled as Dave treated her, and the occasional crackle of the radio. The red and blue lights from our ambulance painted the scene in alternating shadows, a surreal operating theater under the stars. I worked methodically, the way I'd been trained. Isolate the vessel. Control the bleeding. Repair the damage. Every movement precise, every second counted. In those moments, I wasn't a disgraced doctor or a recovering addict. I was just a surgeon doing what I was born to do, fight death with steady hands and stubborn hope. BP's dropping, Dave called over his shoulder, having returned to monitor the boy's vitals. Almost there, I replied, tying off the final suture. The bleeding had stopped, but Tyler had lost a significant amount of blood. He needed a hospital, fluids, transfusions, things we couldn't provide in the field. Let's move him. Now. Together, Dave and I extracted Tyler from the wreckage and transferred him to the ambulance. The girl, his girlfriend, we learned, insisted on riding with him, clutching his hand as I continued to monitor his condition. What did you do back there? Dave asked quietly as he drove, sirens blaring, toward the county hospital 20 miles away. What I had to, I replied, keeping my eyes on the cardiac monitor. Nothing more. But we both knew it was much more than that. I had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. 3 hours later, I sat in the hospital waiting room, still in my blood-stained uniform. The emergency surgeon had taken one look at my field repair of Tyler's femoral artery and asked where I'd trained. I'd mumbled something about combat medicine experience and disappeared before she could ask more questions. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the worn furniture and outdated magazines. Hospitals are the same everywhere, liminal spaces where joy and tragedy coexist, where life hangs in careful balance. I'd spent most of my adult life in places like this, first as a student, then as a resident, finally as an attending physician. Now I was just another visitor, powerless and waiting. I knew what was coming. Using surgical techniques beyond my certification. Performing a procedure only doctors were authorized to do. I'd saved Tyler's life, but likely ended my career. Again, my phone rang. It was Mark, my supervisor, calling me in for a meeting at 9 a.m. I'd expected nothing less. As I stood to leave, a woman burst through the emergency room doors. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in hastily thrown-on clothes, her eyes wild with panic, her hair disheveled. Tyler's mother, I knew instantly. She had his same angular jawline, the same dark eyebrows. A nurse pointed her toward the information desk, but her gaze caught mine first, the blood on my uniform telling its own story. She crossed the room in seconds. "Are you one of the paramedics?" she asked, her voice breaking. My son, Tyler Mitchell, they said he was in an accident. Yes, ma'am. I was there. The doctors are working on him now. Is he? She couldn't finish the sentence. He's alive, I said. He lost a lot of blood, but he's fighting. She crumpled then, not in despair but in relief, her hands gripping my arms for support. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving my boy. If only she knew the cost. I gently guided her to a chair, explained what I could about Tyler's injuries. The femoral artery damage, the blood loss, the compound fracture. I left out the part about performing vascular surgery on the side of a highway. That conversation was for another day with different people. His girlfriend? She asked suddenly. Amber? They were coming back from a movie in Phoenix. She's okay. Some lacerations, possible concussion. They're treating her in exam room 3. She nodded, then looked at me more closely. You look exhausted. Just doing my job, ma'am. No, she said, squeezing my hand. You did more than that. I can tell. Before I could respond, a doctor emerged from the trauma bay and called her name. She stood, straightening her shoulders as if preparing for battle, and followed him through the double doors. I watched them go, then quietly slipped out of the hospital into the pre-dawn chill. I drove home in silence, the adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving me hollow and drained. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, I stripped off my bloodied uniform and stood under the shower until the water ran clear. As steam filled the small bathroom, I studied my reflection in the mirror. Same face, different eyes. 5 years ago, I would have been congratulated for the save I'd just made. Now, I was facing the end of what remained of my career. Was it worth it? I thought of Tyler, of the life ahead of him. College, love, family, joy, pain, all the messy beauty of existence. Yes, it was worth it, even if it meant starting over again. I fell into bed as the sun cleared the mountains, exhaustion finally overwhelming me. For the first time in years, I dreamed of operating rooms and the clean, decisive movements of surgery. In my dreams, I was whole again. Mark's office was small and cluttered with regulatory binders and family photos. A man of systems and procedures, he ran the tightest EMS unit in 3 counties. He didn't look up when I entered, just continued reviewing what I assumed was my incident report. Sit down, Brooks. I sat, preparing myself for the inevitable. I'd lose my paramedic license. I'd face possible legal charges. I'd have to start over again, somewhere even more remote, with even fewer options. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, I could hear the muted sounds of the station, radio chatter, the coffee machine gurgling, someone laughing. Normal life continuing while mine hung in suspension. Mark finally looked up, his expression unreadable. He was in his 50s, with a weathered face that had seen too many tragedies and a compassion that somehow hadn't been eroded by them. The surgeon at County called me this morning. Said your field intervention on that boy's femoral artery was, and I quote, textbook perfection under impossible conditions. Said whoever trained you deserves a medal. I said nothing. You want to tell me where a paramedic learns to perform vascular surgery in the back of a wrecked Jeep? The moment had come. I could lie again, construct another false history, or I could finally stop running. I was chief of trauma surgery at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Until 5 years ago. Mark's eyebrows shot up, but he waited for me to continue. I lost my medical license after becoming addicted to opioids following a back injury. I performed surgery while impaired and nearly killed a patient. The words came easier now, rehearsed countless times in my mind. I've been clean for 4 years, but the medical board deemed me unfit to practice. Mark was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then he sighed and closed the folder. You broke protocol. You performed a procedure you're not certified to perform. By all rights, I should fire you on the spot and report you to the licensing board. I know, but that kid would be dead if you hadn't. I looked up, surprised by the direction this was taking. I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation, Mark continued. The boy's mother is apparently some kind of lawyer. She's already asking questions about the miracle paramedic who saved her son. My stomach dropped. A lawyer. Of course. This isn't over, Brooks. But for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. I left Mark's office feeling strange, neither relieved nor afraid, just suspended between what was and what might be. As I walked through the station, Dave caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of something understood but unspoken. Whatever happened next, I wasn't entirely alone. Administrative leave gave me too much time to think. I hiked in the mountains, trying to exhaust my body enough to quiet my mind. I attended more recovery meetings, sharing carefully edited versions of my current situation. I cleaned my house obsessively, as if organizing my external environment could somehow bring order to my internal chaos. And I waited. For the legal notice. For the licensing board. For the other shoe to drop. I called my sponsor, Jim, twice during those days. He'd been sober 20 years after losing his architecture practice to alcohol. He understood professional disgrace in a way few people could. "You saved a life," he reminded me during our second call. "Whatever happens next, hold on to that." I could have done it differently, I argued. Called in the trauma helicopter. Tried another approach with the tourniquet. "Could you? Really?" he asked. "Or are you just telling yourself that to feel in control?" He was right, of course. I'd made the only choice possible in that moment. The problem was, I'd made similar rationalizations during my addiction. Just this once. No other option. Special circumstances. The slippery language of self-justification. What if I made the wrong choice for the right reasons? I asked him. "Then you accept the consequences and move forward," he replied simply. "That's all any of us can do." The urge to use was stronger than it had been in years, the familiar siren song promising escape, oblivion, a temporary respite from uncertainty. I found myself driving past the local pharmacy more often than necessary, remembering how easy it once was to forge prescriptions, to charm nurses into looking the other way, to find dealers when legitimate sources dried up. But I didn't stop. I didn't use. I continued to wake up each morning, watch the sunrise, and count the days. 2 years, 3 months, and 20 days. 21. 22. The knock on my door came Thursday evening. I expected a process server, maybe even the police. Instead, when I opened the door, I found a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a determined expression. "Tyler's mother." "Mr. Brooks?" she asked. "Michael Brooks." "Yes. I'm Sarah Mitchell. My son Tyler is alive because of you." She extended her hand. "May I come in?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside to let her enter. My apartment was sparse. A couch, a small table, bookshelves filled with medical texts I couldn't bring myself to part with. The trappings of a temporary life, a way station rather than a home. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I'm a lawyer, Mr. Brooks. Finding people is part of the job." She set her purse down and faced me directly. "The hospital staff wouldn't tell me much, but I have colleagues at Northwestern who remembered a gifted surgeon named Michael Brooks who disappeared 5 years ago after losing his license." There it was. No more hiding. "What do you want, Mrs. Mitchell?" "I want to understand why a former chief of trauma surgery is working as a paramedic in Arizona, and why he risked everything to save my son." I should have been defensive, should have asked her to leave. Instead, I found myself telling her everything. The back injury during a 30-hour shift, the escalating pain, the prescription that became a necessity, then an addiction. I told her about the night I operated while high, nearly severing a patient's hepatic artery because my judgment was impaired. About the intervention, the rehab, the loss of my family and career. About the years of shame and running. She listened without interruption, her face revealing neither judgment nor pity, just the careful assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating complex situations. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My husband died of an opioid overdose 3 years ago," she finally said. "He was a good man who made mistakes he couldn't find his way back from." The admission hung in the air between us, a shared understanding of how quickly lives can unravel, how addiction doesn't discriminate, how thin the line between functioning and falling apart really is. "Tyler wants to be a doctor," she continued. "He started talking about it as soon as he was conscious. He said the paramedic who saved him had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen, even though he was barely awake during most of it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a legal pad. "I specialize in medical license reinstatement cases, Mr. Brooks, and I believe you deserve a second chance, just like you gave my son." "Ms. Mitchell, Sarah, please." "Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but my case isn't the same as others. I violated the fundamental trust of my profession. I put patients at risk. And then you saved a life when every protocol said you shouldn't," she countered. "That has to count for something. Why would you help me?" I asked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said simply. I know you've stayed sober for over 2 years in a high-stress job. I know you risked your career to save my son. And I know that medicine needs doctors who understand how easy it is to fall and how hard it is to get back up. She left her card on my coffee table before leaving. Think about it, she said. Tyler's going to be in the hospital for at least another week. He'd like to thank you in person, if you're willing. I watched her drive away, her card untouched on the table, possibilities I'd long since abandoned suddenly, terrifyingly, within reach again. I visited Tyler 3 days later. He was pale against the hospital sheets, his leg immobilized, but his eyes were alert and curious. At 17, he straddled the line between boy and man, old enough to contemplate mortality, young enough to bounce back from its close call. You're him, right? The paramedic, he asked as I entered the room. I am. Michael Brooks. You saved my life. Direct, no preamble. The prerogative of youth. Mom says you used to be a surgeon. I glanced at Sarah, who sat in the visitor's chair beside his bed. She shrugged unapologetically. I was. Are you going to be one again? The question caught me off guard. Its simplicity, its presumption of possibility. I don't know, I answered honestly. It's complicated. Doesn't seem that complicated to me, Tyler said, with the magnificent certainty of someone who hasn't yet experienced how life can corner you into impossible choices. You're good at it. Really good. The doctors here were all talking about how you stitched me up by the side of the road. I didn't know how to explain to him that skill was never the issue. That medicine isn't just about technical prowess, but about trust, about judgment, about the privilege of making decisions that alter lives irrevocably. How's the leg feeling? I asked instead. He launched into a detailed description of his injuries, his surgeries, his prognosis, absorbing medical terminology with the enthusiasm of someone who sees it as a future language rather than a current crisis. As he spoke, I found myself automatically assessing him: fluid balance good, cognitive function normal, pain managed but present. The doctor's gaze, never quite forgotten. I missed state championships, he said suddenly, his voice dropping. I was supposed to compete in the 400 meter. Had a real shot at breaking the school record. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. At his age, such losses loom large. It's okay, he replied, with a maturity that surprised me. Mom says I can try again next year. And anyway, not being dead is pretty cool too. I laughed despite myself. That's certainly one way to look at it. When I left an hour later, Sarah walked me out to the parking lot. The desert evening was settling in, the heat of the day giving way to a gentle coolness that hinted at the night to come. Have you thought about my offer? She asked. I have, I admitted, but I'm not sure it's the right path. For anyone. Why not? Because second chances are complicated. Because trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. Because the medical community has long memories and little forgiveness for certain transgressions. All true, she acknowledged, but incomplete. Second chances also offer wisdom that first chances never could. Broken trust can be rebuilt, different but sometimes stronger. And communities can change when given reason to. She handed me a thick folder. This is what the process would look like. Review it. Think about it. And know that whatever you decide, I'm grateful for what you did for Tyler. I took the folder, not committing to anything, but not refusing outright either. It was more openness than I'd allowed myself in years. The next 3 months were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and scrutiny. Sarah guided me through the complex process of applying for license reinstatement. The evaluations, the character references, the documentation of sobriety, the letters of explanation. Each step exposing another layer of my past, another opportunity for rejection. Mark supported my application, writing a detailed letter about my performance as a paramedic. Dave did too, describing my composure under pressure. Even Dr. Eleanor Weiss, the surgeon who had treated Tyler, contributed a statement about the life-saving field intervention. The hardest part was contacting former colleagues from Chicago. People who had witnessed my decline, who had tried to help before it was too late, who had ultimately been forced to report me to protect patients. Some didn't respond. Others were cautiously supportive, their wariness evident even in carefully worded emails. Dr. Fairbank, my old mentor, was the most forthright. You hurt a lot of people, Michael, he said during our video call. Not just patients. Those of us who believed in you. Those of us who trusted you. I know, I said, accepting the rebuke as my due. But I always said you had the hands of a natural surgeon. Best I've ever trained. He sighed. the sound carrying across the digital connection. I'll support your application. With conditions. Those conditions became part of my proposal to the medical board: supervised practice only, ongoing substance monitoring, restricted access to controlled substances, regular psychological evaluation. A probationary license that would be reviewed quarterly for the first 2 years. Through it all, Sarah was a steadfast ally, bringing legal expertise to what often felt like an insurmountable challenge. We spent long evenings at her kitchen table, reviewing regulations and precedents, preparing for the inevitable questions about my fitness to practice again. Tyler recovered well, trading his hospital bed for crutches, then a walking boot, then careful steps with a physical therapist. I visited weekly, our conversations evolving from his immediate medical concerns to broader discussions about medicine as a career, about resilience, about making peace with altered plans. "Did you always want to be a doctor?" he asked during one visit, as we sat on his back porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "Pretty much," I replied. "My father was a general practitioner in a small town in Michigan. I used to shadow him on his rounds when I was about your age." "Were you scared?" "When you were operating on me on the side of the road." I considered the question carefully. Not scared, exactly. Focused. There's a kind of clarity that comes in those moments. Everything else falls away. "Even though you knew you might get in trouble?" "Even then." He nodded, processing this. "That's how I feel when I'm running. Like nothing else matters. Just the track, and the finish line." In those moments, I glimpsed the physician he might become: observant, thoughtful, able to draw connections between disparate experiences. If nothing else came from this ordeal, at least I'd played some small part in setting him on that path. The hearing before the Arizona Medical Board was scheduled for early December, 9 months after the accident. I prepared obsessively, reviewing my case with Sarah, rehearsing answers to potential questions, steeling myself for the possibility, likelihood, even of rejection. "Remember," Sarah said the night before, "they're not just evaluating your past mistakes. They're assessing who you are now and what you've learned from those mistakes." The hearing room was austere, a long table where the board members sat, facing a single chair for the applicant. Sarah sat behind me, a reassuring presence as I answered question after question about my addiction, my recovery, my years as a paramedic, the night I saved Tyler. Dr. Jameson, the chair of the board, was particularly pointed in his inquiry. "Dr. Brooks, what makes you believe you won't relapse under the pressures of medical practice, pressures that contributed to your addiction in the first place?" A fair question, the one I'd asked myself countless times. "I can't promise I'll never face temptation again," I answered honestly. "What I can promise is that I now have the tools, the support system, and the hard-won wisdom to recognize those pressures before they become overwhelming. I understand my limits in a way I never did before. And if you do face temptation, what then?" "Then I'll use the resources built into my recovery plan, my sponsor, my therapist, the monitoring program. I'll reach out before reaching for substances. That's the difference between who I was then and who I am now." The questions continued for 2 hours. About my technical skills after years away from surgery. About my commitment to ongoing education. About how I would handle the skepticism of colleagues and patients. When it was over, I was escorted from the room while the board deliberated. Sarah and I waited in silence in the hallway, the clock on the wall marking each passing minute with excruciating precision. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "you've already won the most important battle." Before I could ask what she meant, the door opened, and we were called back inside. That was 9 months ago. Today, I'm standing outside the Arizona Medical Board offices, waiting to hear their decision on my application for a limited medical license. Sarah is beside me, her legal briefcase in hand, having spent countless hours preparing my case. The journey hasn't been easy. I've undergone psychiatric evaluations, random drug testing, countless interviews where I've had to relive my darkest moments. I've faced the skepticism of colleagues and the judgment of those who believe some mistakes can never be forgiven. But I've also experienced something I never expected: community. The hospital where Tyler recovered has offered me a position, contingent on today's decision. Mark has become a fierce advocate, testifying to my character and skills. And Tyler, now fully recovered and applying to colleges, stops by my apartment regularly to talk about his plans to become a doctor. "Whatever the board decides," Sarah says, breaking the silence, "you've already accomplished something remarkable. You've faced your past instead of running from it." I nod, grateful for her presence, for her belief in second chances. In the months we've worked together, she's become more than just my attorney. She's become a friend, someone who sees both who I was and who I might become. The desert sun is warm on my face, a reminder of the unexpected life I've built here in this small Arizona town, a life I never planned, in a place I never imagined, with people I never expected to meet. Whatever happens next, this place has changed me, has taught me that redemption doesn't always look the way we expect. The board's secretary appears at the door, calls my name. It's time. I don't know what they will decide today, but for the first time in 5 years, I'm not running. I'm standing still, facing whatever comes next. I think of Tyler, of the minutes that stretch between life and death at night on the highway, of how quickly everything can change for worse, yes, but sometimes also for better. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like we expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of a terrible accident on a desert highway, a life hanging in the balance, and the courage to finally be who you really are, scars, mistakes, and all. My name is Michael Brooks, and this is my story of a second chance. 3 minutes. That's all it takes to bleed out from a severed femoral artery. 3 minutes between life and death. But sometimes, 3 minutes is all it takes to find your way back to yourself. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.